The alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., just like every other morning for the past 3 years. Lisa rolled out of bed with the same mechanical precision she'd perfected since that terrible day when her world fell apart. Coffee first, always black, no sugar. Then the same navy blue scrubs, the same ponytail, the same route to Riverside General Hospital. She was 32 now, though some days she felt much older. The mirror reflected tired eyes that had seen too much pain, both in the emergency room. And in her own life, 3 years ago, she had been a completely different person. Back then, she believed in fairy tales and happy endings. She had wedding magazines scattered across her coffee table and a ring on her finger that caught the light just right. But that was before. David, before the betrayal that cut so deep she sometimes wondered if the wound would ever truly heal. The hospital corridors buzzed with their usual morning energy as Lisa made her way to the emergency department. She nodded to colleagues, exchanged brief pleasantries, but kept her distance. Everyone knew her story by now, though they rarely spoke of it. The nurse who had it all planned out, whose wedding invitations were already printed, whose heart was shattered 2 months before the big day. David had been her college sweetheart. They'd dated for 6 years, lived together for 2, and she thought she knew him better than anyone. Then came that awful evening when she walked into their apartment early from her shift, expecting to surprise him with dinner. Instead, she found him with Jessica, her best friend since nursing school. The woman who was supposed to be her maid of honor. The confrontation that followed was ugly. David claimed he'd been unhappy for months, that he'd fallen out of love, but didn't know how to tell her. Jessica, tears streaming down her face, insisted it had just happened, that they never meant for it to go this far. But Lisa knew better. She could see in their eyes that this had been going on for a while, that they'd been lying to her face every single day. That night, she moved out. She returned the ring, canceled the wedding, and threw herself into work with a determination that worried her family. Next, her mom called every week, asking when she'd start dating again. Her sister sent her articles about healing and moving on, but Lisa had made a decision that felt like the only way to survive. She would never put herself in that position again. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Trust was a risk she wouldn't take. The emergency room became her sanctuary. Here she could channel all her energy into something meaningful. She was good at her job, really good. Patients trusted her, doctors respected her, and new nurses looked up to her. In this controlled chaos of beeping machines and urgent voices, she found a purpose that didn't require her to open her heart. Her apartment reflected her new philosophy. Clean, sparse, functional, no pictures of happy couples, no romantic movies, no reminders of dreams that had died. Just medical journals, crime novels, and a TV that mostly stayed off. She ate dinner alone, went to bed alone, and woke up alone. It was safe, predictable, and exactly what she needed. Today started like any other. The morning rush brought the usual mix of cases: a construction worker with a broken arm, an elderly woman with chest pain, a teenager who'd had an allergic reaction. Lisa moved between patients with practiced efficiency, her hands steady, her voice calm and reassuring. Then they brought in the young soldier. He couldn't have been more than 22, about the same age as her younger brother Tommy. The kid was unconscious, his uniform torn and bloody from a training accident. As the team worked to stabilize him, Lisa found herself thinking about Tommy, who joined the army 2 years ago and was currently stationed overseas. The soldier's eyes fluttered open as she checked his vitals. Mom, he whispered, confused. And scared? You're safe, Lisa told him, her voice gentle. You're in the hospital. We're taking good care of you. She held his hand as they wheeled him to surgery, and for just a moment, her carefully constructed walls wavered. This was someone's son, someone's brother, someone's whole world. His mother was probably somewhere else, worried sick, not knowing if he was okay. After her shift, Lisa sat in her car in the hospital parking lot, gripping the steering wheel. She thought about the young soldier, about Tommy, about all the people who mattered to someone else. When had she become so isolated? When had keeping herself safe become the same as keeping herself alone? She drove home to her empty apartment, heated up a frozen dinner, and sat at her kitchen table with a medical journal. But the words blurred together as she found herself thinking about the life she'd built. It was safe, yes. Protected, absolutely. But was it really living? For 3 years, she'd convinced herself that being needed professionally was enough, that saving lives at work could fill the emptiness at home, that walls built high enough could keep out pain forever. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, she wondered if those same walls might be keeping out something else entirely. The young soldier would recover. His family would get the call that he was okay. They'd probably visit, bring flowers, cry with relief. He'd go home to people who loved him, who'd worried about him, who'd celebrate his recovery. Lisa finished her dinner alone, just like every other night. But something had shifted today, something small but significant. A tiny crack in the foundation of the life she'd built. Barely visible, but undeniably there. She didn't know it yet, but change was coming. Not in the dramatic way she'd once believed in, but in the quiet, unexpected moments when life has a way of surprising you.
Oh.
Tomorrow would bring new patients, new challenges, and perhaps something else entirely that she wasn't prepared for. But tonight, she was still the woman who'd vowed never to love again. Still the nurse who'd built walls so high, she sometimes forgot what the view looked like from the other side. Still alone. But maybe, just maybe, starting to wonder what it might feel like to let someone in again. 2 weeks later, Lisa's carefully ordered world was about to get turned upside down. She walked into the hospital that Monday morning, expecting another routine day, but the buzz of conversation in the break room told her something was different. There, sending someone from the military, Kelly, one of the younger nurses, was saying excitedly, some kind of training program. He's supposed to teach us combat medicine techniques. Lisa poured her coffee and tried to ignore the conversation. She'd heard about these programs before. Usually some hotshot military medic would come in, act like civilians didn't know what they were doing, spend a few weeks showing off and then disappear. But she had no interest in dealing with someone who thought their way was automatically better. At exactly 8 a.m., Dr. Patterson gathered the emergency staff in the main conference room. Standing next to him was a man in his late 20s, wearing army fatigues that looked like they'd seen real action. He was tall, with dark hair and serious eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "This is Sergeant Jake Morrison, Dr. Patterson announced. He's here as part of the military liaison program. He'll be working with us for the next 3 months, sharing trauma care techniques developed in combat zones." Jake stepped forward, and Lisa noticed he didn't have the cocky attitude she'd expected. Instead, he seemed almost uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm not here to change how you do things," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "You folks save lives every day. I'm just here to share some techniques that might help in certain situations. I hope we can learn from each other." Lisa found herself studying his face as he spoke. There was something in his eyes, a kind of tiredness that she recognized. It was the look of someone who'd seen too much, carried too much weight. She knew that look because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. The first few days passed without much interaction between them. Jake observed mostly, taking notes, asking occasional questions. He was polite, but kept his distance, which suited Lisa just fine. She had her routine, her patients, her walls. She didn't need complications. Then came Thursday morning, and everything changed. The call came in at 6:47 a.m. Multi-vehicle accident on the highway. 3 cars, possibly more victims. Lisa's team sprang into action with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this 100 times before. The first ambulance arrived with a middle-aged woman who'd been driving the lead car. Broken ribs, possible internal bleeding, but conscious and stable. Lisa was working on getting her force started when she heard the commotion behind her. "Get me to units of blood now," Dr. Patterson's voice cut through the noise. "This one's crashing." Lisa glanced back to see a young man on the stretcher, his face pale, blood soaking through makeshift bandages. The paramedic was rattling off. "Vitals that didn't sound good, Lisa. I need you over here," Dr. Patterson called out. She finished with her patient and rushed over, but the scene was chaos. The young man was going into shock, his blood pressure dropping fast, Dr. Patterson was trying to find the source of the bleeding while two other nurses worked to get blood products ready. That's when Jake appeared beside her. "Can I help?" It asked quietly. Lisa's first instinct was to say no. This was her department, her patient, her responsibility. But something in Jake's voice made her pause. There was no arrogance there, no assumption that he knew better, just a genuine offer to help. "He's losing too much blood," she said. "We can't find where it's all coming from." Jake moved closer, his trained eyes scanning the patient. "May I?" he asked Dr. Patterson, who nodded grimly. What happened next was like watching someone who'd done this in conditions Lisa couldn't imagine. Jake's hands moved with incredible precision, finding the source of bleeding that had been hidden beneath other injuries. He worked with a calm focus that seemed to slow down time itself. "There," he said softly. "Got it, but we need to move fast." For the next 20 minutes, Lisa found herself working alongside Jake in perfect synchronization. He anticipated what she needed before she asked for it. When she reached for supplies, he was already handing them to her. It was like they'd been working together for years instead of days. The patient stabilized. His color improved, his vitals strengthened. By the time they wheeled him to surgery, Jake had quite literally saved his life. Lisa expected Jake to make a big deal of it, to point out how his military training had made the difference. Instead, he quietly cleaned up and went back to his observation post, as if nothing unusual had happened. But Lisa couldn't stop thinking about what she'd witnessed. The way Jake had moved, the way he'd worked, the way he'd stepped in without making anyone feel small or inadequate. This wasn't the show-off military medic she'd expected. During her lunch break, she found herself walking past the small office they'd given Jake. The door was open, and she could see him writing in a notebook, not typing on a computer or talking on a phone, but actually writing with a pen on paper. "Thank you," she said from the doorway. He looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For this morning. For helping save that kid's life." Jake set down his pen and really looked at her for the first time since he'd arrived. "That's what we do, isn't it? Save lives. Doesn't matter if you're military or civilian." Lisa found herself lingering in the doorway, curious despite herself. "What are you writing?" "Letters," he said simply. "Two families. Soldiers I served with who didn't make it home. I write to their parents, their wives, their kids. Tell them stories about their loved ones that they might not have heard." Lisa had built around her heart trembled slightly. This man, this stranger, was taking time every day to comfort grieving families. How many people did she know who would do something like that? "It's really kind of you," she said, her voice softer than she'd intended. Jake shrugged. "It's the least I can do. Some of them died, trying to save their buddies. Their families deserve to know what kind of people they were." Lisa nodded and started to walk away, then stopped. "I'm Lisa, by the way. I know Dr. Patterson introduced everyone, but I don't think we've actually talked." "Jake," he said, even though she already knew his name. "And Lisa, thanks for trusting me this morning. I know it couldn't have been easy, letting some stranger jump into your case like that." As she walked back to her patients, Lisa realized something that both surprised and worried her. For the first time in 3 years, she'd met someone who made her curious about the person behind the professional mask. Jake Morrison was definitely not what she'd expected, and that scared her more than she wanted to admit. 3 weeks had passed since Jake's arrival, and Lisa found herself doing something she hadn't done in years, looking forward to work for reasons that had nothing to do with her patients. Not that she'd admit it to anyone, especially not to herself. Jake had settled into the rhythm of the emergency department like he'd always been there. He never pushed his way into cases, never acted like he knew better than the doctors or nurses. Instead, he quietly observed, offered help when asked, and shared techniques that actually worked. The other staff had warmed to him quickly, something that surprised Lisa, given how protective they usually were of their territory. She was restocking supplies in the trauma bay when Dr. Patterson's voice crackled over the intercom. "All available personnel to the ambulance bay. Major industrial accident incoming. Multiple casualties." Lisa's stomach tightened. These were the calls that tested everyone, the ones that could haunt you for weeks if things went wrong. She grabbed her supplies, and headed for the bay, her mind already shifting into crisis mode. The first ambulance screeched to a halt, followed by another, then another. The scene that unfolded was every emergency worker's nightmare. A gas explosion at the chemical plant on the outskirts of town had left dozens injured, some critically. Burns, lacerations, possible chemical exposure. The first paramedic called out as they wheeled in a man whose face was covered in protective gauze. More coming in behind us? Lisa caught Jake's eye across the chaos. He gave her a small nod, the kind of communication that happens between people who understand each other without words. They'd worked together enough times now that she trusted his judgment, something that still surprised her. The next 6 hours blurred together in a haze of blood, bandages, and desperate attempts to save lives. Lisa worked on a young mother who'd been visiting her husband at the plant when the explosion happened. Burns covered 30% of her body, and she kept asking about her 2-year-old daughter who'd been with her grandmother. She's safe, Lisa told her, though she had no idea if that was true. Sometimes you had to give people hope to keep them fighting. Across the room, Jake was working on one of the plant workers, a man in his 50s whose injuries were so severe that 2 other doctors had already given up. But Jake wouldn't quit. Lisa watched him work with the same focused determination she'd seen that first day, refusing to let death win. Around hour 4, when the worst of the casualties had been stabilized, Lisa felt her hands start to shake. It was something that happened sometimes after particularly difficult cases. The adrenaline wearing off and leaving her shaky and exhausted, she stepped outside for air. Leaning against the brick wall of the hospital, the October evening was cool and she could still smell smoke from the plant fire that had been extinguished hours ago. Rough night. Jake's voice came from beside her. She turned to find him standing a few feet away, his scrubs stained with blood and soot. He looked as tired as she felt. "That's the job," she said, though her voice came out shakier than she intended. "Doesn't make it easier," he replied, moving closer. "You did good in there. That woman you were working on, she's going to make it because of you." Lisa felt tears prick her eyes, something that rarely happened anymore. "I kept thinking about her little girl. What if she didn't make it home?" Jake was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "I lost my best friend in Afghanistan. I'd blast. I was supposed to be in that vehicle with him, but I'd gotten sick the night before. Food poisoning. He died, and I lived, and for the longest time I couldn't understand why." Lisa looked at him, seeing the pain in his eyes that matched what she sometimes felt in her own chest. "I'm sorry. I was pregnant," Jake continued. "She had their son 3 months later. Named him after his dad. I write to her every month. Send pictures when I can. That little boy will never know his father, but he'll know that his dad died trying to save his friends." "That's why you write all those letters," Lisa said, understanding clicking into place. "Everyone deserves to be remembered," Jake said simply. "Everyone deserves to know they mattered." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Lisa realized this was the first time in 3 years that she'd shared a moment like this with someone, a moment of real connection that had nothing to do with work or obligation. "I was supposed to get married once," she found herself saying, the words coming out before she could stop them. 3 years ago. Found out 2 months before the wedding that he was cheating with my best friend." Jake didn't respond right away, and Lisa was grateful for that. So many people felt the need to fill silence with empty words, meaningless platitudes about how she was better off without him. "That's why you keep everyone at arm's length," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "Safer that way," Lisa admitted. "Can't get hurt if you don't let anyone close." "But you can't be happy either," Jake said gently. "Trust me, I know. I've been doing the same thing since I lost my friend. My marriage fell apart. It's easier to keep moving, keep working, keep helping other people instead of dealing with your own stuff." Lisa turned to look at him fully for the first time since they'd come outside. "Your marriage fell apart? Couldn't handle the deployment? She needed someone who could be there, and I needed someone who could understand why I couldn't be. We're both right, and we were both wrong. Sometimes that's just how it goes." The door to the hospital opened, and Dr. Patterson stuck his head out. "Lisa, Jake, sorry to interrupt, but we've got another ambulance coming in. Minor injuries, but we need all hands." They followed him back inside, but something had changed between them. Lisa couldn't name it exactly, but it felt like they'd crossed some invisible line. They'd stopped being just colleagues and started being something else. Something that scared her more than she wanted to admit. As they worked through the rest of the night, Lisa found herself hyper-aware of Jake's presence. The way he moved, the way he spoke to patients, the way he seemed to anticipate what she needed. When their hands brushed, reaching for the same piece of equipment, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. The flutter of possibility. But with that flutter came fear. The walls she'd built had kept her safe for 3 years. It protected her from the kind of pain that David had caused. Opening herself up to Jake would mean taking a risk she'd sworn she'd never take again. As the sun came up over the hospital, Lisa made a decision that surprised even her. She was going to stop running from the possibility of connection. Not because she was ready to fall in love again, because she was tired of being alone with her walls. Jake Morrison had shown her that not everyone was like David. Some people stayed when things got hard. Some people wrote letters to grieving families and refused to give up on patients that others had written off. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to let someone in again. For 2 weeks after the chemical plant incident, Lisa felt like she was living in a different world. The walls she'd built around her heart were still there, but they had cracks now. Letting in tiny streams of light she'd forgotten existed, she caught herself smiling at Jake's quiet jokes, looking forward to their brief conversations during shift changes, and even staying a few extra minutes after work when she knew he'd be finishing up his reports. It was dangerous territory, and she knew it. But for the first time in 3 years, dangerous felt like it might be worth it. That illusion came crashing down on a Tuesday morning when she walked into the hospital break room and saw him sitting at the corner table. David, her ex-fiancé, looking exactly the same as he had 3 years ago, except for the expensive suit and the nervous expression on his face. Lisa's blood turned to ice. Her coffee mug slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor, sending hot liquid splashing across her scrubs. David stood up quickly, his voice filled with something that sounded like relief. "I was hoping I'd find you here." "Are you doing here?" The words came out harsher than she intended, but she didn't care. Seeing him brought back every painful memory she'd spent 3 years trying to bury. "I needed to see you," he said, taking a step closer. "I've been thinking. About us. About what happened. I made the biggest mistake of my life, Lisa. I want to fix it." The break room suddenly felt too small, too hot. Lisa was aware of other staff members trying not to stare, but she could feel their eyes on her. This was her private nightmare playing. "Out in public? Fix it," she repeated, her voice getting louder. "You want to fix sleeping with my best friend? You want to fix lying to me for months? You want to fix destroying our entire relationship 2 months before our wedding?" David held up his hands like he was trying to calm a wild animal. "I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible choices, but Jessica and I, we're over. Have been for months. I realize now that you're the one I should have fought for." Lisa felt like she was going to be sick. "Get out," she said quietly. "Lisa, please, just give me 5 minutes to explain. Get out." This time she shouted it, and the entire break room went silent. David looked around at all the faces staring. At him, then back at Lisa. "I'm staying at the Hampton Inn on 5th Street, room 237. When you're ready to talk, to really talk, I'll be there." He left, and Lisa stood there shaking, surrounded by the wreckage of her coffee mug and the curious stares of her coworkers. She mumbled something about cleaning up the mess and fled to the supply closet, where she could finally fall apart in private. She sat on a box of medical supplies and cried for the first time in months. Not just for the pain David had caused, but for the confusion he'd brought back into her life. Just when she'd started to believe that maybe, possibly, she could trust someone again, he showed up to remind her why she'd built those walls in the first place. The rest of her shift passed. In a blur, she avoided the break room, ate lunch in her car, and tried to pretend that nothing had happened. But Jake noticed. She could see it in the way he looked at her, the concerned glances he threw her way when he thought she wasn't watching. Around 3 p.m., She was restocking supplies when she made a mistake that could have been deadly. She'd grabbed the wrong medication for a patient's IV, something she'd never done in 10 years of nursing. Her hands were shaking as she realized what she'd almost done. Jake appeared beside her so quietly. She didn't notice him until he gently took the medication from her hands. "Wrong dosage," he said simply, reaching for the correct one. "Easy mistake to make when you're having a rough day." Lisa stared at him, horrified. "I could have killed him." "But you didn't," Jake said firmly, "and I've got your back. We all make mistakes." He quietly corrected the error, made sure the patient got the right medication, and never said a word to anyone about what had happened. No lecture, no judgment, just quiet protection when she needed it most. But instead of feeling grateful, Lisa felt terrified. This was exactly how it started with David. The kindness, the protection, the feeling that someone had her back. And look how that had ended. Over the next few days, Lisa found herself pulling away from Jake. She stopped lingering after her shifts, avoided the break room when she knew he'd be there, and kept their interactions strictly professional. Noticed he didn't say anything, but she could see the hurt in his eyes. The worst part was that she knew she was being unfair. Jake wasn't David. He'd proven that over and over again. But fear was stronger than logic, and every time she looked at him, she heard David's voice saying he wanted to fix things. On Friday, Jake got called into Dr. Patterson's office. When he came out, his face was grim. "Everything okay?" Kelly asked. "Might be getting transferred," Jake said quietly. "There's a situation overseas. They need experienced medics." Lisa felt her heart drop into her stomach. The thought of Jake leaving should have been a relief. It would solve her problem, remove the temptation, let her go back to her safe, lonely life. Instead, it felt like losing something precious before. She'd even had the chance to truly appreciate it. That evening, she sat in her car in the hospital parking lot staring at her phone. David had called 6 times in the past week, leaving messages about how sorry he was, how much he missed her, how they could start over. Jake walked past her car on his way to his truck, and their eyes met through the windshield. For a moment she thought he might come over, might ask what was wrong. But then he just nodded and kept walking. Lisa watched him drive away and realized she was about to lose the best thing that had happened to her in 3 years. Not because Jake had betrayed her, but because she was too scared to trust her own judgment. David was offering her the past, wrapped up in pretty words and empty promises. Jake was offering her the possibility of a future, but only if she was brave enough to take it. She looked at her phone one more time and made a decision that surprised even her. She deleted David's messages without listening to them and drove home. Some walls were meant to be torn down. The question was whether she had the courage to pick up the sledgehammer, or if she'd let fear keep her trapped behind them forever. The next morning, she'd have to decide which was stronger, her need to stay safe or her need to finally start living again. Lisa didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about choices and second chances and the difference between being safe and being alive. By the time her alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., she'd made a decision that both terrified and excited her. She was going to fight for something real, but first, she had to deal with David. The Hampton Inn lobby smelled like industrial coffee and cleaning supplies. Lisa's hands were sweating as she rode the elevator to the second floor, heart pounding like she was heading into surgery instead of a conversation. David answered his door in wrinkled clothes, his hair messy like he hadn't slept either. "Lisa," he said, relief flooding his voice. "I knew you'd come. I knew you'd realize that we belonged together." "I didn't come here to get back together," Lisa said, stepping into the room but staying near the door. "I came here to get closure." David's face fell. "Lisa, please. I know I hurt you, but people make mistakes. We can work through this. We were good together once." Lisa agreed. "But that was before you chose to lie to me for months. Before you chose Jessica over me. Before you chose to break my heart instead of just being honest about your feelings." "I was confused," David said desperately. "I didn't know what I wanted." "But I do," Lisa said. surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I know exactly what I want, and it's not this. It's not someone who runs away when things get complicated and then comes back when it's convenient." She looked around the hotel. Room at David's expensive clothes draped over the chair, at the room service tray from last night. This man had waltzed back into her life, expecting her to drop everything and take him back. 3 years ago, she might have been tempted. The old Lisa had believed in fairy tales and happy endings. But the new? Lisa had learned something important. Not all love stories were worth saving. "I forgive you," she said, and meant it. "Not for you, but for me. I forgive you for cheating, for lying, for breaking my heart. But forgiving you doesn't mean I want you back." David stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. "But I love you," he said weakly. "No, you don't," Lisa replied. "You love the idea of me. You love having someone who was always there, always supportive, always willing to put your needs first. But you don't love me enough to have been honest when things got hard." She turned to leave, then stopped. "I hope you find what you're looking for, David, but it's not me." Lisa walked out of that hotel room feeling lighter than she had in years. The ghost that had haunted her for so long was finally laid to rest. But now came the hard part. Finding Jake and hoping it wasn't too late. She drove to the hospital with her heart in her throat. Jake's truck wasn't in the parking lot, which meant he was either already inside or hadn't come in yet. She checked the schedule and felt her stomach drop. He wasn't on the schedule at all. "Kelly," she called to the young nurse as she rushed through the emergency department. "Where's Jake?" "He left about an hour ago," Kelly said, looking confused. "Said he got his transfer orders. Something about a flight this afternoon." Lisa felt the world tilt sideways. She'd spent the morning dealing with her past, and now her future was driving away. She grabbed her phone and called Jake's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Without thinking, she ran back to her car and drove toward the airport. It was a 30-minute drive, and she spent every minute of it practicing what she'd say if she'd found him. How do you tell someone that you're sorry for being scared? How do you explain that you want to try again when you've already pushed them away? The airport was chaos. Lisa ran through the terminal looking for military personnel, checking every gate, asking everyone in uniform if they'd seen Jake Morrison. Finally, a young soldier pointed toward gate 15. "Saw him about 20 minutes ago," the soldier said. "But I think his flight already boarded." Lisa ran toward gate 15, her scrubs drawing stares from other travelers. The gate was nearly empty, just a few stragglers and the airline staff cleaning up. She was too late. Then she saw him. Jake was sitting in the last row of seats, a duffel bag at his feet, staring out the window at the plane that was supposed to take him away. He looked up when he heard her running footsteps, and the expression on his face was one she'd never seen before. Complete surprise, mixed with something that might have been hope. "Your flight," Lisa gasped, out of breath from running. You missed. Your flight." "Yeah," Jake said slowly, standing up. "I did." "Why?" Jake looked at her for a long moment, and Lisa could see him weighing his words carefully. "Because I realized that running away when things get complicated is exactly what you thought I'd do, and I didn't want to prove you right." Lisa felt tears start to roll down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry for pulling away. I'm sorry for being scared. I'm sorry for almost letting fear ruin the best thing that's happened to me in 3 years." "You went to see him," Jake said. "It wasn't a question." "I did. I told him it was over, really over. It's not because of you, but because I finally understood that some things aren't worth saving." She took a step closer. "But some things are worth fighting for." Jake reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "Lisa, I need you to be sure. Because I've done the leaving thing, and I've done the staying thing, and staying is harder. It means being there when things get messy. It means not running when you get scared." "I know," Lisa said, "and I'm terrified. But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to try." Jake smiled then, the first real smile she'd seen from him since David had shown up. "So what do we do now?" "Now," Lisa said, "we start small. We have coffee, we talk. We take it one day at a time and see what happens. I can live with that, Jake said, as they walked out of the airport together. Lisa realized that this wasn't the fairy tale ending she'd once believed in. It was better. It was real. To people who'd been hurt choosing to trust again. Choosing each other not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. 6 months later, Lisa would look back on this moment as the day she stopped, just surviving, and started living again. Not because Jake had saved her, but because she'd finally found the courage to save herself. Some love stories begin with fireworks and grand gestures, but the best ones, Lisa had learned, begin with a simple choice. To be brave enough to let someone in, walls and all,